140%. At the same time, they have kept this 15 years moving. So they already have a 15-year, has 5 years moving, but it doesn't have a corridor. And the amortization period is over 20 years. Sunland's recommendations is this: if you do want to consider the alternatives presented by Chiron, to consider the 30-year amortization and permitting negative amortization. And our rationale is this: both of these approaches are generally accepted and are widely used by public plans as well as private plans, and they're specifically sanctioned under GASB rules. Remember, several months ago I was here talking about the GASB 45, and in that particular calculation we did use a 30-year amortization period for the unfunded actual liabilities. We think that 10 years moving and increasing the corridor would not be prudent, and the reason is that it's really too much departure from market value. When we are looking at 130, 140% of market value, that number becomes way too artificial for my taste. And it may actually violate GASB rules or generally accepted actual principles, although there are no specific prohibitions. The last thing is that current financial economics thinking really prescribes using full market value. I mean, we hear the word mark to market. Basically, he said, okay, you should use market value because that's the best valuation you get. That's what the market determined. And that is reflected in current IRS funding rules as well as the FASB Financial Accounting Standards Board disclosures for private companies. So what are the impacts of considering the 30-year amortization? So you can see that the first column is the first set of numbers, and the second is the 30-year amortization, and that will reduce the amount by about $10 million over the 5 years, Jeff. And then if you permit negative amortization, you will pick up another maybe $1 or $2 million. So that's my presentation.
Jeff, do you want to give us your recommendations on this before we begin discussion?
Yeah, I'd be happy to give you my opinion. The premise, I think, for making a change would be that what we've gone through and what we're going through is an aberration. That this, as Kong said, is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We certainly hope that that's true.
Yes, we do.
There's a lot of lessons learned in the financial markets from what happened. On that premise, then I would agree with Kong in terms of his recommendations that modifying the calculation for this 1 year only would be appropriate, because I think the added risk, if you will, associated with doing that is relatively minor. So that's where I come down on it. That's my opinion.
Okay. All right, let's start with Commissioner Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I've heard quite a few presentations by actuaries in the last 10 years. And
what a surprise.
I thought that was actually very clear and even mildly entertaining. Thank you. A small feat in your field. I appreciate the approach, which was to be professional and to be to give the board your best advice on what's appropriate in this historical and economic context. My feeling is that this would be useful for the SD-SERS board to have as it considers what actions it would take, and would be my preference, since none of us as a board is an actuary. I don't think. Maybe Mr. Hall, he's probably pretty close. But I would suggest that we not that we do forward Mr. Kong's letter to the board and suggest that they use it as input as they make their decision. I mean, if it's appropriate, make it as a motion, but
I certainly will accept it.
All right, it'll be my motion.
Okay, so we now have a motion on the floor. Scott, I'm going to get there. I have lots of requests to speak. But Mr. Peters was first. And you're second.
I'm not sure whether I'm speaking to the motion or speaking to the discussion, since we have a motion on the floor before we've had a chance to kind of speak to the discussion. I'm not speaking to the motion, I'm speaking to the discussion before us.
Let it happen.
Let's go back, Mr. Kong, to explaining to us what negative amortization is and why you are recommending that we permit it, and what you would say reasons are that we should not permit it. Let's start with the basic concept of what is it.
Okay, I anticipated that question, so there's an extra slide at the end. So if we think about having a loan, so let's say we have a loan of $1 million, right? There are many different ways of paying back a loan. For example, you can have a balloon payment where you don't pay anything until the end. You pay all your interest plus the principal in one lump sum, right? So a fully amortized loan basically is saying that, well, instead of paying these big chunks at the end, you have a discipline where you pay regular annual payments or monthly payments throughout the period of the loan, right? So this is a 30-year loan where if you pay annual payment at a level amount, which is a kind of loan that we are familiar with, like mortgage loans and things like that, you will see the blue line, that would be about $80,000 a year for 30 years to pay back the $1 million loan. But that's not the only way of paying back the loan. So the red line is a payment back of the loan through a series of annual payments, which increases at the rate of 4.5%, right? Now, why 4.5%? Well, that is the assumption for the salary increase in the actual assumption. So the idea is that the loan payment or the amortization payment will be in proportion to the growth of the payroll of the organization, right, as a level percentage of payroll organization, right? So that is the red line. So instead of a blue line, which level, now we have a red line that goes from the, oh, I'm sorry, is it not showing on the screen?
It's orange. I'm just trying to find the red line.
The red line. Oh, orange line, okay, orange line.
Orange, good.
Okay, so about $50,000, but then it will go up to almost $200,000 over the 30-year period. Right. But
I'm sorry, it's a technical point.
Sure.
You started this explanation with talking about $1 million debt and how to amortize it over 30 years.
Correct.
And then you got to the explanation of what negative amortization is,
right,
the orange line, and I would have expected the origin of the orange line to be coincident with the beginning of the blue line. Why are they different?
Well, if we look at the blue line, the total of the blue line plus the interest add up to $1 million.
But but in your discussion, your presentation of the $1 million, you didn't speak about the 4.5% increase. The first time you spoke about that was when you got to negative amortization. Was that just something I missed? I should have understood about the blue line incorporated also the 4.5% increase, and it was set to cover that.
No.
I'm not getting the same set of circumstances as it relates to the blue line and the orange line.
Let me start again. I apologize.
Please do.
Okay. So this concept of negative amortization comes from the fact that you amortize using the orange line instead of the blue line. So that's the concept.
They give you a cheap buyout in the early years. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't characterize that way.
Cheap contribution, is that a better phrase?
Lower contribution. A lower contribution.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So the pain is not as great
Yes.
in the early years under this concept as just recognizing what your real debts are and are expected to be. The blue line is an accurate representation of what your debts forecast for 30 years and cranking in the 4.5% are actually what it would take over 30 years to pay for it.
I'm sorry. No, the 4.5%. Let me back up.
Please do.
What you earn, you owe $1 million, right? And the $1 million has a 7.75% interest rate on that loan, right?
Okay.
So based on that, you would have paid back, say, about $80,000 a year over 30 years. Right? So that's the starting point. So a level amortization of $1 million and a 7.75% interest rate require an annual payment of $80,000, and that's the blue line.
Does the blue line
And
include the salary increase to the employees?
It has nothing to do with salary increase at that point.
Then why does the orange line have it in?
Sure.
Why doesn't the blue line reflect the interest, you just said 7.75%, and the assumed increase in the employee pay scale? Why doesn't both of them include the same factors?
The $1 million loan is not, is not affected by the salary increase of the employees. It's just a $1 million loan.
But is it realistic in light of the interest you're paying and the assumed increase in the salaries that you project the organization's going to pay? Is the $1 million going to cover both of those things over the 30 years? I guess is the most fundamental question.
Yeah.
Well, Marky's really up next, but is your point to Mike's point? Then let's
Go ahead, please.
Help. Put your mic on, Bill.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. I think part of the point you're making, you've got $1 million loan, you've got 7.75% interest, you're going to pay back X, okay, in total. What the orange line depicts is the fact that you have a known average annual increase in overall salary of 4.5%. It makes logical sense. And oh, by the way, I think that the net is the amount paid back over the entire 30-year amortization period is the same under both scenarios. Yes, sir.
It's the area under the curve.
That's correct. It's the area under the curve. That's exactly right, sir. So what's happening is that
I agree with Rocky. That's not that.
Okay.
The area under the curve.
From the intercept,
It should be the same. The area under the curve should be the same. Is basically what it comes down to. On the orange line, you start out lower, but you end higher, substantially higher than the straight line amortized amount on the blue line. Okay, with me? So the area under the curve is the same. You're paying back the same amount.
If I believed that, Bill, I'd be more comfortable in the discussion. I don't believe that. Graphically, that isn't true.
Okay, is
That's essentially correct.
You mean your graph is not drawn to scale? Because the area under the curves is not the same. You can see that by just looking at it.
Well, it's not the same because the fact that you paid a little less in the beginning, that means you owe a little bit more interest. So you have to pay back that little difference at the end. But I think the concept, what Commissioner Hall described, is essentially correct. I mean, let's use a very simple example. Let's say you've got an incredible lender that charges you no interest. Right? Then the area under the blue line and the red line would be exactly the same.
That's true.
Right. But I think conceptually, I think Commissioner Hall described exactly the total payments you made under the blue line and the total payment under the red line will be sufficient to pay off the $1 million loan in both cases. So there are two different schedule of payments, if you will, right? Remember, when I started the discussion, one of the schedules is that you don't have to pay anything until 30 years is up. Then you pay $1 dollars, right?
But I hesitate to weigh in on this, Michael, but I think what you're trying to say is the blue line has no salary discussion at all. It's just a straight level.
Didn't hear.
Right. And in the orange line, you're saying we're looking at apples and oranges here.
That's what
I think that's what you're trying to get to, isn't it?
Right. I'm trying to get the lines to represent exactly the same.
You're trying to make it equal. Apples and apples, not apples and oranges.
They are the same because they pay back the same $1 million loan. I think what the point is that the schedule of the payment...
They pay back the same $1 million loan, but do they pay it back with the same number of dollars total cost?
Okay, now I have moving period in place, and now they're going to raise the corridor from 120 to 140%. The City of Los Angeles is considering raising